Good morning. We've heard throughout the week a lot of very detailed explanations of Fatima, the Fatima message, the history of Fatima, what needs to be done at the level of the Vatican, level of the hierarchy of the church. So I wanted to do today is sort of, with my talk, is break things up a little bit by offering some practical suggestions for how we can put these great ideas and great ideals that we have now that we've been learning this week, how we can put them into play in our daily lives as priests, as fathers, as Catholics trying to live in a world that's becoming increasingly anti-Catholic. So we're going to talk about the culture question. And what I mean by the culture question is Catholic culture, Christian culture, versus a very anti-Christian, a very anti-Catholic culture that has sprung up and that is affecting all of us, probably much more than we care to admit, how much we've all sort of sold out to this culture in which we are finding ourselves today immersed in. Perhaps to give us an idea to set the tone for this talk of how far we may have come, I'm talking about us now, people who are at least trying to be faithful to Our Lady of Fatima and to what we know to be true. So culturally speaking, to give us an idea, to give ourselves an idea of how far we've come, perhaps it's a good idea to remind ourselves that way back in 1934, Pope Pius XI issued an encyclical called Vigilante Cura against the movie industry, the film industry, Hollywood movies, shortly after he had set up what was called the Legion of Decency. I'm not going to read you a quote from that encyclical. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. But I'm just going to ask the question, as we now soon will jump into precisely what's happening in entertainment today. I'm going to ask the question of you priests, what do you suppose Pius XI was so concerned about in 1934 that merited two encyclicals going after the Hollywood movies, the film industry? Think of the movies, if you've ever seen them, from 1934. They're barely talkies. They're almost just past the silent film era. And yet, the sensus Catholicus, the Catholic sense of Pius XI and the priests and bishops and faithful, even early on in 1934, was such that they were terribly, grievously offended by the movies of that time, 1934. So if we could compare what you can remember, the flickering black and white images now that we can get on DVDs, these old movies, compare it to what we have today. And it's quite frightening to think how much we've all imbibed of this culture, how much we've all been broken down and conditioned to accept what we're being given and calling it entertainment provided to us by the enemies of our faith. It's become so ridiculous now that Catholic action, I'm talking about good Catholic people, what a good Catholic does when he goes to the films, and he goes to most of them now, he lowers his eyes at the nude scene, the scene where there's naked images on the film, in the film, and counts himself very virtuous for having done so. And we all find ourselves doing this to some extent or another, whether it's watching the television, watching the movies, listening to music that we know is offensive to Our Lady, that we know is offensive to God, that we know is in violation to the Church's moral theology, the teaching on morality. So that's to set the stage here. And then to connect it to Fatima, I thought I would bring up the fact that it's very interesting that on May 13, 2007, exactly 90 years to the day from when Our Lady appeared at Fatima, Pope Benedict XVI visited your country, visited Brazil, and tried to do for Latin America what Our Lady had tried to do for the entire world. He tried to warn Latin America, home to the world's half of the world's 1 billion Catholics, that our Blessed Mother can no longer restrain the hand of her divine Son from striking the world with a just punishment for its many crimes. And on that occasion, just 3 months ago, His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI made note of the fact that family is, quote, one of the most important treasures of Latin American countries. But, says the Pope, it is threatened by legislation and government policies opposed to marriage, for example, contraception and abortion. He also condemned abortion, gay marriage, and warned of the rise of drugs, immorality, and hedonism, or what Our Lady of Fatima called the sins of the flesh. So just after showing the children of Fatima the vision of hell, Our Lady said something that was to become one of the most famous quotations from the entire message of Our Lady of Fatima. She said, "More souls go to hell because of sins of the flesh than for any other reason." So we often think, when we think of Fatima, of Russia, of the consecration that's required to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, or we think of the 5 warnings, we think of the first 5 Saturdays, and so forth. But perhaps we do not give enough thought to the fact that in many ways Our Lady of Fatima's message concerned itself with sexual revolution, a breakdown in morality, a breakdown in marriage, in family life, and even the advent of grotesquely immodest fashions that would be deeply offensive to our Lord. So again, sins of the flesh, she mentions. She cautions that certain fashions are going to be introduced that will offend our Lord. She cautions that many marriages are not good. They do not please our Lord and are not of God. So many Fatima experts speculate, rightfully so, that the unabridged version of the third secret, the entire third secret, which we believe we agree with Mother Angelica of EWTN, the television network, Catholic television network, when she said, I am one of those who does not believe we had the entire third secret after 2000. So these experts speculate that there must be something in the third secret having to do with crisis in the church, crisis in the liturgy, breakdown in the doctrine or dogmas of the church. And I think that all the facts point to that conclusion. However, Our Lady of Fatima does not say more souls go to hell because of a doctrinal breakdown in the church than for any other reason, does she? She says, she specifies, she stipulates sins of the flesh, which she's concerned will lead to the damnation of millions. And there's no contradiction. It's no coincidence that the breakdown in doctrine, the breakdown in discipline in the seminaries, the breakdown in liturgical life of the church, abuses coming into the liturgy, manifested itself most profoundly in the year 1960. 1960. The 1960s were a very turbulent decade, and I'm going to have to apologize to you because I'm not sure exactly what was going on in Latin America during the 1960s. I'm presuming it was something similar to what was going on culturally in the United States and in Europe, which was a massive sexual drug revolution. By 1969, for example, we had the Summer of Love. We had what was called Woodstock. Does Woodstock mean anything to you, fathers? I don't know if stories of, or if the reports of Woodstock are something that you're all familiar with. But you'll remember what Woodstock, I'm seeing nods, you'll remember then what Woodstock meant, what it represented. Where would Woodstock, this great cultural icon of revolution against family, against society, against the state, ultimately against God, where would it have been without rock music, without the music that was the engine that drove that revolution in the 1960s? Again, in the 1960s, the rock and roll sexual revolution. In other words, Our Lady of Fatima is chiefly concerned that the great moral authority of the world, the only moral authority in the world, the Catholic Church, would undergo a period of what Pope Paul VI termed auto-demolition, And from that auto-demolition or auto-destruction would result a universal revolution against Christian morality, a universal revolution against Christian culture. And that certainly is what we've seen for the past 50 years. An inducement to sexual indulgence, to self-indulgence, to sins of the flesh. She was concerned, Our Lady of Fatima was, about the moral upheaval that would lead to the damnation of millions of souls, presumably. Knowing now what we do about the 1960s, there's no small wonder then that in 1946, when Sister Lucy was asked when the third secret would be revealed to the world, without hesitation, she said, in 1960. In 1955, Cardinal Ottaviani asked Sister Lucy why it was not to be opened before 1960. She told him, because then it will seem clearer. Mish claro. Sister Lucy had made the Bishop of Fatima promise that the secret would be read to the world at her death, but in no event later than 1960, because, says Sister Lucy, the Virgin wishes it so. Why 1960? In my opinion, it is because Our Lady of Fatima was anticipating the universal death of Christian culture and the rise of a culture inundated with sex and sewage that would rival pagan Rome in its last days. In other words, the culture that we are all living through at this moment. Our Lady was concerned that the corrective hand of Holy Mother Church would, for a variety of reasons, begin to be held back, would no longer correct her children as she had always done so lovingly. So even as the Israelites gave themselves over to lust and debauchery, when Moses stayed too long on Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments from our Lord, the same would happen in 1960s when the church would begin to pull herself back from the moral authority that she'd always been, and her children would give way to the same lust and debauchery, which is what clearly has happened. So they told the church, you're too authoritarian. You've got to become more with it. You've got to concentrate more on the positives, less on the negatives. Let's have 10 suggestions more than 10 commandments. And so to some extent, there was an acquiescence on the part of the church to this pressure. I'll give you an example. Eating meat on Friday, or abstaining from eating meat on Friday. I'm assuming that custom that was also down here in Latin America. Eating meat refraining from, restraining ourselves, making that small penance that the church asked us to do, to not eat meat on Friday, was not a harsh thing, and yet the world sort of made fun of that. Catholics can't eat meat on Friday. And so the church changed that rule a little bit and said, okay, if you have to not eat meat on Friday, if you can't do that, if you can't abstain, well then do some other thing that's equal, something similar, in order to satisfy the need that we all have to offer penance. But this was a great mistake. Anyone who's a father of a child or children will know if you give your children options like that, they will choose the easiest one. Ultimately, if they can get away with it, they will choose to avoid it altogether. And so in my country, nobody does any penance on Friday anymore. We eat meat, we eat fish, we eat whatever we want. There's no indication, there's no teaching that we're supposed to do any penance at all on Friday now. I mean, it's on the books, but it doesn't reach the pews. And so this little motherly disciplinary thing that the church had lovingly given her children for how many thousand years, for 1,000 years or how many years, was removed or was altered, was changed a little bit until the point where we have now, there is no penance being done. And this is very unfortunate. Self-denial, self-sacrifice has gone by the wayside. In America, in my country, penance now means having to wait a few extra moments in the drive-thru before we can get our Big Mac and French fries. If there's a line going to the McDonald's restaurant, boy, that's tough. That's difficult for us. In other words, we don't even have the ability to practice penance anymore. When we want something, we take it. We want it now. We don't even wait around when we order something, some product over the internet. It has to come the next day. We don't want to wait 2 or 3 weeks. And so this self-gratification, we immediately must be satisfied. That's been the result of this idea of making the church more tolerable, more tolerant of her children. We are turning into barbarians. We know nothing about self-restraint. And certainly when it comes to sexuality and morality, the same holds true. Sexual addiction has become a very, very serious problem that people don't like to talk about in the United States, but it's a very serious problem. So we'll consider some of these ideas. I'm going to start with television in a moment. But first I want to begin with music, with the question of music. The introduction of this depraved form of music, rock and roll music. The interesting thing about rock music, rock and roll music, is that when it first came on the scene in 1954, Christian society rejected it. The Vatican spoke against it. Bishops and priests spoke against it. Rabbis and Protestant ministers organized youth rallies against it. When the Beatles came to the United States, a so-called British invasion in 1963, what was the result? This is considered the greatest rock and roll band in the world now, so they say, the Beatles. When they came to the United States, they were met with protests at the airports. When they tried to have their music played, American radio stations refused to do so. American young Christians and Catholics got together across the country and held what they called Beatle burning records. They burned rock and roll when it first came to our country. Why? Because everything about that music was offensive to the Christian mindset of the 1950s and before. And so when it came in with gusto in 1960, including, of course, Elvis Presley, is that a name that you recognize? So when you start talking against someone like Elvis Presley, people are going to laugh at you. People are going to say, you have a problem with Elvis Presley. You are paranoid. What was wrong with Elvis? Well, those of you who are older than I am can probably remember how offensive the dancing was that Elvis Presley popularized. Elvis the Pelvis, they called him. When he would come into these venues with the new music, very beat-centric, fast music, and he would have young girls. You remember the images, the pictures of thousands of young teenage American girls, and probably South American as well, screaming at Elvis Presley. Not only screaming, but crying their eyes out and shaking. They were so excited about this new thing that was happening. This was a revolutionary musical construct. And I don't care if you want to laugh at me for being concerned about the influence even of the early rock and roll performers and artists. We have to go back as Catholics and look at the Catholic reaction to that music when it first came on the scene. And if we can now look at Shakira, one of your exports, thank you very much. If we can look at her and say, that's not bad, good music. And then you think that my grandfather, your parents, your grandparents, those of you who are my age, when they saw Elvis Presley, were deeply concerned in their hearts and in their souls for what was happening to their society. In other words, they had a more keen sense, Catholic sense, of what is right and wrong. When I see that the present current rock and roll or pop performers, it doesn't offend me as much as it should. I was born in 1966. I grew up in the rock and roll era. But if my grandfather saw what I must see every day in the airports, on the television, he would have a heart attack. He would be convinced that the world had been invaded by strippers, by immoral people. He would not see it. He would not see these performers as mere entertainers. He would see them as revolutionary, as destructive to the soul not only of the individual but of society. So today we have 10-year-olds 10-year-old little girls imitating their favorite pop stars, whether it be Shakira or Britney Spears or whoever the latest poor little waif is that this powerful industry sets up as the god or the goddess of the sexual revolution. We have these little 10-year-olds, little girls, wearing the shirts, showing the midriffs, showing now their bottoms, dancing in a way that Christian society rejected for 1,000 years. These are 10-year-old little girls emulating their favorite pop stars. Fathers, we have a problem. We have a serious problem, especially in light of Our Lady of Fatima's warning. Sins of the flesh will cause more souls to go to hell than any other reason. We have, again, a problem. And again, the exports from your country, Christina Aguilera, Shakira, all these different Catholic, born and raised Catholic young women are being exported into my country so that the world can see that even the Catholics, all the Catholics now are embracing this new moral debauchery, this decadence on the entertainment scene, in Hollywood, in the movies. They love it when a Catholic performer like Ricky Nelson comes along. Frank Sinatra did this many, many years ago, even with the jazz movement. Catholics are always going to rise to the top of this. Madonna, the infamous Madonna, who mocks the very name of Our Lady, a Catholic and proud of the fact that she's rejected her Catholicism, telling all her little fans that she's rejected her Catholicism. Oftentimes, when you look at the CD cover for small pop stars like Britney Spears and the like, and if you look at the fine print, the only person that reads the fine print are the dedicated little fans who want to be just like Britney or just like Shakira. It says in the fine print, support lesbianism, support Planned Parenthood Federation, and so forth. These people have an agenda, and they always have. They have an agenda to destroy the morality of our children. Yes, of course they make millions of dollars doing it, and money is the number one motivation. But they've been selling sex and they've been selling revolution since the 1950s, and we need to wake up and stop entertaining ourselves and stop letting our children be entertained by those who hate her, by those who reject God, and those who completely reject Catholic teaching on moral theology. There is no other way around this. The industry, from top to bottom, from past to present, has been anti-Christian. And this is not a conspiracy. Simply go back and read the lyrics, read the press releases, read about the controversies that these rock superstars were engaging in way, way long time ago. And it's to the point now where I, as a Catholic father, can hardly bring my children into a grocery store to buy a gallon of milk without having my little ones, who do not listen to rock music, who do not watch the movies or watch TV, without having them see images which 50 years ago would have been banned as pornographic on the magazines right at the counter where I'm going to buy my milk. We hardly have a choice, in other words. It is everywhere. These inducements, this cultural machine, that it has so many inducements to sins of the flesh. So, fidelity to Our Lady of Fatima's message has to include, first and foremost, a conscious rejection of the global threat to purity and thus to the souls of millions posed by the entertainment industry. And that's when I began this talk. This, to me, is a practical way that we can get started right away. I can go home and talk about this with my friends. You as priests can go back to telling your flock about things like custody of the eyes. Remember that from when we were young? The little catechism taught us we must practice custody of the eyes. It's becoming almost impossible to even have custody of the eyes, as you all know, because of the fashions, because of the magazines, because of the television, because the world has done precisely what Our Lady warned us that it would do, fall into a sea of sins of the flesh. In my country, or at least in my state, in my area, which is in Minnesota, near Chicago, the priests have been advised that when sins of the flesh are confessed in the confessional, to not make any mention of them to the penitent, to not give any advice on that, but to just leave it alone. The idea being not to frighten away the penitent who has a sin of the flesh to confess. I would love to hear your opinions of this, Father, why this is being done, why this advice is being given to priests. Because we can walk into a confessional and confess infidelity to our wives 100 times, and the priest will say, "That's a good confession. Thanks for coming in today." There's no advice for us. There's no advice for those who are suffering through this sea of debauchery, because some bishops think priests should say nothing about these sins in the confessional. And again, I'm not going to pursue this. This is out of my realm. This is in your realm, clergy, spiritual direction. But if any of you have any idea of why this is happening, or if it's a good idea or a bad idea, please approach me after this talk, because I think we need to get the discussion going on why priests are being advised not to give any advice on sins of the flesh in those who have habitual sins of the flesh. So, moving along. Before you can really understand what the problem is with music, you have to understand, and this will be a review for most of you, but we have to understand the power of music itself. Because what we always get when we talk to young people about pop music and the problems therein, they always say, "Come on, it's just music. What's the big deal? It's just music." So let's talk about that. I think for young kids, young children, a good example of why we shouldn't say it's just music is give them an image they can immediately appreciate, which is, I'm sure it's the case in your country, and I know it is in mine, the historical battles that took place, for example, at the Alamo or wherever you want to, whichever incident you want to, war you want to think about. The soldiers who went out first, in front of all the other soldiers, before the battle was begun in earnest, were what? The soldiers that played the instruments, the soldiers that played the drums. They were the soldiers, they were the people who were going to die first. The first bullets were going to hit them. Why are those drummers, why are those musicians at the front of the column? Because music has the power to inspire men to give their lives for a cause. Just common sense. It's been going on for thousands of years. Music has been used by revolutionaries, by kings, by queens, by presidents to get the masses, to get the people in a certain mindset. So we began to understand the power of music by considering that image. We'll read a few quotes now, having to do with great philosophers of the past and what they thought of music. The first one is from St. Isidore in Etymologies. He says, quote, "Music rouses the emotion. It calls the senses to a different quality. In battles, the music from the trumpet fires the warriors. And the more impetuous its loud sound, the braver is the spirit for fighting. Music also comforts the mind in the enduring of labors, and singing lightens weariness and solitary tasks. Music also calms overwrought minds. Whatever we say or whatever emotions we feel within from the beating of our impulses, it is proven that they are brought into communion with the virtues through the musical rhythms of harmony." Alexander Pope, in his Ode to Music on St. Cecilia's Day, says, "Warriors she drives, and animated sounds, pours balm into the bleeding lover's wounds. What passion cannot music raise or quell? Songs have overthrown kings and empires." The U.S. military actually is presently using, and has been for some time, heavy metal rock and roll as a weapon, as a psychological weapon, part of psychological warfare. First time it was used, to my knowledge, was in 1989 in Panama against Manuel Noriega in what was called Operation Just Cause. And they were trying to break down the morality of the opposition. United States troops pumped loud, pulsating, heavy metal rock and roll music at the opponent until they broke their spirit. So we see, again, kings and queens and presidents, United States military, everyone is very aware of the power of music, but we are not. And by we, I mean Catholic parents and so forth who think that rock and roll music, pop music, is not a threat. We don't understand the power of music. Michael Medved is a Jewish commentator and a powerful political pundit in the United States. He wrote a book called Hollywood versus America. Now, he's not a Christian, but he understands this cultural threat and why it is that we're losing the war, us, those parents and priests who are trying to reinstall Christianity into the fabric of our society. Medved writes, "Perhaps the most damaging of all those distortions involves the glorification of sexual adventurism and the focus on physical pleasure as an end in itself. This is a theme that is exploited by every element in pop culture. But," says Medved, "it is nowhere more powerfully expressed than in the music industry, a mighty industry of staggering global impact that devotes nearly all of its energies to the endless celebration of the raw power of lust." This is a Jewish commentator who gets it. This industry is at war with us, but we just don't know it yet, most of us. And unfortunately, at least in South America and Latin America, you have a substitute for rock pop music. We don't have one. You have your great history of culture, folk songs, folk music. Your young people love to sing. Because rock and roll has been so effective in the United States, there's very little that can even supplant it, because we don't have that folk tradition that our young people are willing to sing and willing to use to supplant rock music. And so it's an uphill climb. But Pope Benedict XVI, when it comes to music, certainly gives us some ideas of what we need to be doing. He writes, "At the 8th International Church Music Congress in Rome in 1986, when Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger blasted music, rock music, as a vehicle of anti-religion." What is this, some paranoid, goofy commentator that doesn't get it and doesn't like the new kids' music? This is Cardinal Ratzinger calling this music a vehicle of anti-religion. But he goes on. He said, "Rock and roll is a secular variant of an age-old ecstatic religion in which man, quote, lowers the barriers of individuality and personality to liberate himself from the burden of consciousness. Rock music is the complete antithesis of Christian faith in the redemption." And you've all seen this. I'm sure it plagues you to see your own young people. When Cardinal Ratzinger says, liberating themselves from the burden of consciousness. All of our young people throughout the world are drinking themselves and dancing themselves into a state when they no longer have consciousness, at least consciousness to what is right and wrong. They're drugging themselves. They're dancing themselves crazy. They're over-sexing themselves. Where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? It's coming from the entertainment industry. Cardinal Ratzinger says it right here, and he is absolutely right. A little more recent Cardinal Ratzinger on pop music. Page 148 of his book, the name of the book is The Spirit of the Liturgy. It was released in 2000, very recently. Cardinal Ratzinger excoriated as a symptom of contemporary Western cultural decline the current popularity of rock music among youth, linking it directly to their alienation from true worship at Mass. Now get this quote. I'll read it slowly so we can catch it. This is Pope Benedict XVI, okay? Just a few years before the last conclave. Listen to what he says. "Rock music is the expression of elemental passions, and at rock festivals, it assumes a cultic character. a form of worship, in fact, a form of worship. In opposition to Christian worship, people are, so to speak, released by rock music from themselves, by the experience of being part of a crowd, and by the emotional shock of the rhythm, noise, and special lighting effects of the rock concert. However, in the ecstasy of having all their defenses torn down, their defenses against sins of the flesh torn down beneath the elemental force of the universe. This is not ranting. This is not, some paranoid person. This is the Pope of the Catholic Church recognizing and targeting the fact that they are after our youth through the music and through the entertainment industry. So what we need to do, and then I'm going to move on, we'll talk a little bit about television, the other cultural influence of some significance. What we need to do is think about, again the little girls, the young girls who are being exploited by this industry because of their youth and their beauty and their sexuality. They're being exploited. They burn out quickly. They're very soon thrown aside. Most rock and roll superstars, or gods and goddesses, end up suicidal, end up on drugs, end up dying young, as we all know. But when you compare then what this industry does, takes innocence and puts it up on high, degrades it, and makes it a model for our children. And then we think of Jacinta of Fatima, the little girl who never said a word to Our Lady because she was so in love with her and so in awe with her. Think of this little girl, little Jacinta, with the cord around her waist, a rope, a rough rope, to make up for the sins of people who would go to hell because she had seen hell. Little Jacinta, the little girl who gave up drinking water during the hot summer afternoons because she wanted people to go to heaven and see Our Lady. Think of the innocence. Think of the purity. Now think of what the rock industry has done to such little girls in our own day and age, and let your Catholic ire rise up inside of you. Let's go to war against this industry. Think of what they are doing to our innocence. Think of what they are doing to chastity and to purity. Let's go to war against it. Let us reject it. Because if we want to prevent sins of the flesh, we have to start here. We have to start by targeting the industry that is causing millions upon millions upon millions of sins of the flesh throughout my country, your country, Europe, and beyond. Now, we'll talk very briefly about television, and I'm going to have to read statistics. I'm sorry, I don't like to do that. But the best way to understand the threat of television is to read the statistics. It is literally the most powerful cultural force in our lives today. So I'll try to read them quickly. First of all, we're going to talk about just time spent watching TV, watching the television. An estimated number of TVs in the United States is 109 million. The average U.S. home has more televisions than people living in it. 2.5 people, 2.8 televisions in my country. In 2007, parents aged 45 to 54 will spend 47 days per year watching television. The Kaiser Family Foundation study of 2004 found that the average time children spend watching TV is 4 hours per day. According to a Houston and Wright University study, children spend more time watching television than any other activity except for sleep. 54% of children today have a TV in their bedrooms in the United States. 1 in 5 toddlers, 3-year-olds, have a television in their bedrooms. Children aged 2 to 5 average 25 hours per week watching TV. Children aged 6 to 11 average 22 hours per week watching television. According to Abandoned in the Wasteland, by the Federal Communication Commission's Newton Minnow, quote, "By the time most Americans are 18 years old, they have spent more time in front of the television than they have spent in school and are far more than they have spent talking to their teachers, their friends, or their parents. By first grade, most children have spent the equivalent of 3 school years in front of the TV. And by the time a child reaches the age of 70 in my country, he or she will have spent approximately 7 years watching television. 7 years watching television. The television, according to the Christian Science Monitor, reaches children at a younger age and far more time. They spend far more time with the television than they do socializing with their own families. So if you can put this in perspective, all of you are wearing these headphones today, and you've been doing so for a number of days, and I'm sure it's difficult to be hooked up to technology like that and to try to find out what we are trying to say up here from the podium. But though you've been doing that for the past 4 days, children in your parishes, children back home in my country, spend this much time, as you've spent with your headphones on, they spend this much time and more listening to music, watching TV, or being on the internet every single day. So imagine how many ideas and thoughts have come into your head this week because of these headphones, because you're listening to these talks from people who are trying to be Christians, being Catholics. I mean, now imagine all these children and the messages they're getting through their headphones from people, again, who reject Our Lady and reject our Lord. Gives you some idea. So you as priests, or me as a father, you as priests, are going to spend 1 hour on Sunday morning at Mass trying to reach your children when those same children have been spending 3 hours every day listening to the enemy watching the television set. Good luck. Good luck trying to win them over. And so now we'll talk a little bit about the actual content of television. I'm going to go more quickly here because I know statistics are boring to listen to. So I'll go a little more quickly with what is actually being watched during these 4 hours every day by little 12-year-old children. In a sample of programming from the 2001 and 2002 television season, sexual content appeared in 64% of all programs. Those programs with sexually related material had an average of 4.4 sex scenes per hour. Talk of sex now on TV back home, 61% of the time of the programming. The favorite television program for 12-year-old girls, 12 to 17-year-old girls, is American Idol and Will and Grace, which is a sitcom about a homosexual and a woman who lived together. 12 to 17-year-olds, that's their favorite program. Consider the influence of the medium. The 2004 Super Bowl, the National Football League Super Bowl final competition for the United States football, featured I'm sure you all remember this, it was a scandal, featured a halftime entertainment program featuring Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake, 2 rock pop stars, doing what amounted, and I'm sure what your fathers and grandfathers would have called a sex stage act, doing this on the stage in which the woman's costume was ripped off, supposedly by accident, and exposed her bare breast. This is the number of children who saw that while they were watching television with mommy and daddy watching the Super Bowl. The number of children, CBS's Fiasco, estimates that 6.6 million kids between the ages of 2 and 11 were subjected to that. Another 7.3 million teens, 17 to 12, were tuned in at the time as well. We began to see what these children are up against and how we have to lead them through this darkness that's been provided by the entertainment they are given. We have to love them. We have to show them a way. We have to give them back good entertainment. We have to teach them the folk songs. We have to teach them to read, teach them to have fun. Children need fun music. Children need entertainment. But guess what? There was 1,954 years of that entertainment that's available to us. We can live without rock music, without television. But we act as if we can't. How could we ever take the music away from the children? Well, what were our parents and grandparents doing 50 years ago when it didn't exist? We can go back to that, and we can still have fun, and we can teach the children to have fun. A few more statistics, and I'll move away from this. Movies, this is not television specifically, but movies. Movies have an 87% likelihood of presenting sexual material. The average American adolescent will view nearly 14,000 sexual references per year. And if anybody needs the references, I have them all up here. I'm not going to read them now in the interest of time. Premarital sex is referred to 2 or 3 times every hour in the soap operas in the United States. 64% of all TV shows include sexual content. 64%. Playboy magazine, which has a cable channel called Playboy TV, is available in 24 million of the nation's 81 million homes that receive satellite, cable, or digital television. 24 million homes pumping pornography into their homes. And we wonder why we have a problem in our country and in your country with immorality. Sexual content on primetime TV has tripled in the last 10 years. And here's the kicker. With nearly 75% of all sexual activity on television being portrayed by those who are not married. It goes on and on and on, and I'm going to skip it because I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to get to here. Across the board, the entertainment industry is now in the sex business. And of course, we haven't even touched about the internet. We haven't even touched on the internet. But I think it's very important that all of us as Catholic fathers and mothers and priests begin to recognize the threat of the fact that each one of us has on his kitchen table or in his living room a porthole to the largest red light district in the history of the human race called the internet. It's something that we all use, and it's a very useful tool, but we can't overlook the fact that this temptation is there for all of us. Not down the street at the movie house or at some place of ill repute, but right there in the Catholic sanctuary. Fathers, has there ever been a time in history when right there in the Catholic sanctuary, the home, you have a channel, a portal into hell such as the television and the internet provide us? Our Lord said, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith? When you think of the overwhelming barrage of temptations towards sins of the flesh that are now hitting all of us, right in the face, every day, 24 hours a day, it's not hard to wonder or to think or to imagine what our Lord was concerned about. He was concerned about our day and age, a day and age when it would become so dark that you could no longer see the light. A day and age when children hardly have a chance, when either because of their educators or because of their entertainment, by the time they are 7 and 8 years old, they've lost their innocence. That's what we have done in the mighty New World Order. We've made sure, we have guaranteed that billions of children don't even have a chance to retain innocence and to save their souls. I repeat, Father, it seems to me, to one layman's point of view, we must go to war against this industry. We can no longer hold hands with it. We can no longer try to find the little aspects of it that are not so offensive and that are entertaining, and the kids must have some part of it. They don't need any part of it. They can get by without it. We are Catholics. We are armed with the rosary and with the scapular and with the truth. And we think that we can't possibly go through this world without entertaining ourselves by those who hate our religion, by the product of those who hate our religion. We can't surrender like this, fathers. We can't give up. We have to oppose this. The sex industry in the United States, speaking of sins of the flesh, is a $57 billion industry now. $57 billion industry. More revenue comes in from the sex industry in my country than from all professional football, baseball, and basketball franchises combined with the revenues from ABC, CBS, and NBC networks. Did you hear that? Sports is as popular in my country as it is in yours, and yet more money is generated from the sex industry, thanks to the internet, than from the sports franchises, the professional franchises combined. We have a problem. We have a serious, serious problem. And thanks to the internet, 90% of all 8 to 16-year-olds have viewed pornography online, most while doing their homework. The average age of first internet exposure to pornography in my country is 11 years old. It is stacked against us, fathers, obviously. It is stacked against us. So, there's more of the statistics. I know it's getting late in the day. I'm not going to give you any more. I'm not going to. Thank you, Father. I don't want to give you more. I want to end by appealing to you, priests. As a parent, as a father of 5, soon to be 6 in a couple of weeks, I beg you to lead us. I beg priests worldwide to lead us. Don't give in to these people that want to, these child snatchers who want to steal my children's innocence. Don't give in to the rock and roll thing, the pop music industry. Lead us out of these trenches. Give us sound Catholic warning from the confessional, from the pulpit. Our young people are dying to hear it because there's nothing on that side. People say, oh, the children love rock music. Do they? Do they love their pop music? Are they happy on their dance floors? Are they happy when they're drugged and drunk out of their minds, trying to find meaning in life? This is not the face of happiness that you see in these poor children with everything pierced, with the hair going every direction and every color, with tattoos up and down their bodies, trying to prove to themselves that life has meaning, trying to prove to themselves that they're alive. They are not happy, fathers. And we need our priests to stand up and lead us against this overwhelming army of those who hate Christian morality. And I would give it as an example of the success of this idea that when priests lead, children, young people will follow. The pilgrimages that are happening in France right now. Maybe some priests here have been to the pilgrimage from Notre Dame in Paris to Notre Dame in Chartres in France, where every spring, every Pentecost, 25,000 20-year-olds and younger march for 3 days for 70 miles in honor of Our Lady. There is no rock music on these pilgrimages. There are no bare midriffs on these pilgrimages. There are no low pants on these pilgrimages. Young people are hungering, they're dying to come back to real meaning and to be given a Catholic identity. The sins of the flesh are destroying their souls and destroying their minds, and most importantly, perhaps, as far as our objective here today, they're destroying their potential for happiness. So I'm going to conclude on that. Please, continue this conversation back in your parishes. Lead these children away from this, and I think we have such a much better chance of getting more adherence to what Our Lady of Fatima has asked for, praying the rosary, wearing the scapular, and becoming Catholic once again in a very, very anti-Catholic world. Again, thank you very much for listening.